hello there. You're watching India Global on NDTV. I'm Maha Siddiqui. Over the next half an hour, we'll get you all the big international stories of the week, stories that matter to India. But before that, the headlines. Climate envoys meet in Chennai ahead of the G20 summit. Will the big economies live up to the climate finance promise? US Climate Envoy John Kerry speaks exclusively to NDTV. Strategic trust has been eroded. NSA Ajit Doval tells his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi on the East Ladakh friction that continues between the two sides for over 3 years now. The issue discussed on the sidelines of the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg. Israel's Supreme Court to hear appeals against a controversial new law that curbs its power. Israeli parliament passes the first bill of the planned judicial overhaul that has divided the Israeli society sharply. At the G20 summit this year, under India's presidency, climate is a big agenda. India hopes to channel the voices of the global south and so speak for the more vulnerable nations that do not have a place on the platform of the largest economies of the world. So climate finance and climate justice are the words you'd often have heard. What exactly are they? Simply put, the onus on climate mitigation lies largely with the Western nations, who are historical emitters of greenhouse gases. So will the promised funding come from the West, and what support will be rendered by the West for not just mitigating the current crisis, but also in green transition? The G20 Environment and Climate Sustainability Ministerial meeting is held in Chennai. My colleague Sam Daniel spoke exclusively with the US Climate Envoy John Kerry, who made a promise on climate finance.
The West has largely been non-committal in terms of the climate finance for a long time, and this has put developing countries which could not really help themselves in mitigation for a long time. What's going to change? What can we expect now?
Well, we actually haven't been non-committal. We're very committed. President Biden has created the PREPARE program, which is a $12 billion of 5 years program to help adaptation and resilience. We've been very clear about the $100 billion being provided for in the course of the year, and we're working on the World Bank and the other funding mechanisms to be able to expand the finance, which has to happen. So we're deeply committed, we're working hard, and we'll continue to.
India wants a fair transition. India wants a fair transition.
We do too. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. And that was Mr. John Kerry, the special US Presidential Envoy for Climate, talking to us in Chennai with Suresh, Sam Daniel, for NDTV.
Now, one of the highlights of the Environment and Climate Ministers meeting is the launch of the Resource Efficiency Circular Economy Industry Coalition. This is expected to be a big takeaway in September if it unites nations, industries and experts in their endeavor to propel the global circularity agenda forward. Now, what is circular economy? Basically, it means sustainable growth. Now, Prime Minister Modi has once again pointed out that India is one of the top 5 countries in the world in terms of installed renewable energy capacity. Listen in.
Countries of the global south are particularly impacted by climate change and environmental issues. We need enhanced action on commitments under the UN Climate Convention and the Paris Agreement. This will be crucial in helping the global south fulfill its development aspirations in a climate-friendly way.
Now, the fallouts of the climate change are being felt increasingly across the world. NASA says that July is going to be the hottest month on record. Dr. Gavin Schmidt from NASA has said there's unprecedented changes all over the world. Temperatures are rising each decade. Now, these are some of the points that have been highlighted by scientists who say that 2024 is likely to be even hotter than 2023. The record heat is observed from Rome to Tokyo to China. July 3 was the world's hottest day ever. So all these changes, as well as unpredictable weather and climatic conditions, are being witnessed across the world, and all of it is because of global warming and climate change, and therefore action is required, and most expect this coming from the G20 summit in September in New Delhi. Let's now turn our attention to the other big story from the week. The Indian and Chinese NSAs met in Johannesburg on the sidelines of the BRICS meeting, and Ajit Doval told Wang Yi that the strategic trust between the two countries has been eroded by the situation in eastern Ladakh. He also added that the public and political basis of the relationship between the two countries had been scarred too. Ajit Doval and Wang Yi are their countries' respective special representatives on boundary talks. Now, the last special representatives level meeting was held in 2019, that is before the friction. Since then, no meeting has been held over the issue of the boundary. Interestingly, the Chinese statement after this meeting referred to the exchange of courtesies, remember, during Bali between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping, and they added that the two leaders had discussed the friction and peace and tranquility on the border, a point that was not contested by India, that had earlier only referred to this meeting in Bali as exchange of courtesies. Listen in to the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson.
Now, if you would recall that during the Bali G20 summit last year, we had said, and Foreign Secretary remember her briefing, that Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping, at the conclusion of that dinner hosted by the Indonesian President, they exchanged courtesies and also spoke of the need to stabilize our bilateral relations. As you are aware, we have steadfastly maintained that the key to resolution of this whole issue is to resolve the situation along the LAC on the western sector of the India-China boundary, and to restore peace and tranquility in the border areas.
Well, India chose to up the pressure on China on the sidelines of the BRICS NSA's meeting in Johannesburg, which interestingly is also becoming a platform for a major difference of opinion. China is pushing for an expansion of the BRICS, a move that India and Brazil are not in sync with currently. While China aims at increasing its influence in the developing world and building a bloc to take on the US, Brazil is wary of the move for this exact reason, as per reports. Meanwhile, India wants strict rules on how and when other nations could be associated with the 2009 formed grouping. Any discussion needs to have a consensus among all the BRICS countries. The summit is going to be held between August 22nd and 24th. So will a possible expansion be possible? Which are the countries that are eyeing to be part of BRICS? Why so? And which country, for instance, China, can that be utilizing this to their advantage? Let's discuss all of this with the former Foreign Secretary of India, Shashank, who's joining us here on the show. Many thanks, sir, for speaking with NDTV. I'll start with the meeting in Johannesburg between Ajit Doval and Wang Yi. First of all, what do you make of the fact that this meeting was held on the sidelines of the BRICS NSA's meeting, and India upped the pressure in some way? After all, it has been often said by the External Affairs Minister that the overall bilateral relationship has been impacted, but to use words like strategic trust has been eroded and the basis of public and political relationship is scarred as well. What do you make of it?
I will say that what our NSA has said indicates the assessment in India that at the public and political level, the mutual confidence has eroded, and therefore there is need to be some kind of a move from the Chinese side on the western border as well as along the line of control to establish peace and tranquility. I agree that there was a exchange of courtesies, or maybe they might have spoken about re-establishing confidence and mutual understanding between India and China during Prime Minister's brief talk with the Chinese leader. But the point is that since the meeting in Jakarta, there have been other meetings. Our foreign minister has met Wang Yi, then NSA has met. So there has been no substantive change as far as the ground situation is concerned, because the Indian assessment remains that there is an erosion of mutual trust and mutual confidence, whereas Chinese are trying to repeat things without actual change in the ground situation. So my suggestion would be that the Chinese should really move forward on the ground situation also. And if they want to establish some kind of a mutual trust and maybe go back to the special representative talks, they have to come forward with some specific proposals. What I can say also that maybe the Chinese are trying to give an indication to India that the Americans who have been befriending India, India is also reciprocating. Now the Americans are also trying to open up lines of communication to China. So Chinese are trying to convey to India that they are not totally in a corner, but they are also being wooed by the Americans who are good friends of India. So I think India has to take that into account, of course. But the essential part remains whatever NSA has said, Mr. Ajit Doval has said, that they should really come up with some specific ideas how to bring about peace and tranquility on the border and take away the aggressive postures which they have been taking both on Ladakh side and Arunachal Pradesh side.
But sir, please help us understand that there have been over 24 diplomatic and military level meetings between the two sides since this friction started over 3 years ago, which has not yet been resolved, at least on two very critical points, Demchok and Depsang. What explains China being so stubborn in the face of risking and overall bilateral ties being spoilt between the two countries? And already when they were engaged in a battle with the US, these developments of some lines of communication being opened are recent. But over the last 2 years, they've opened up fronts on many counts, haven't they?
No, I agree with you that there seems to be some misunderstanding within the Chinese leadership. So perhaps there are people within China hierarchy who would like to put pressure on India, where there are others who feel that China's real aim should be somehow in the Indo-Pacific and to bring about better economic relationship with the India-Pacific countries. I think this is more a question, I think, within China. India has to be firm in pointing out to the Chinese that we will stand by whatever positions have been done, because what we say in our bilateral dialogue is also the position which we have to take with our Indian people, and we abide by that because we want the full confidence and understanding of the Indian people in the positions being taken by India in our dialogue with the Chinese. So Chinese have to understand that there's going to be no going back under pressure from the Chinese side.
Also, sir, I'd like a very brief comment from you on the fact that for the last almost 9 to 10 months, it was never revealed that Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi had any sort of conversation apart from exchanging pleasantries or extending courtesies to each other. The explanation has only come after the Chinese side in its latest statement revealed this fact, which has not been contested by India now. Why would this exchange not be revealed?
Well, that I'm not privy to those decisions, but what I can say is that obviously when there is a pleasantry exchange, the two leaders are going to say that, yes, we are two neighboring countries, great countries, we have to re-establish mutual trust and move in that direction. Point is that then it is for the experts and for the senior policy advisors to the Prime Minister on our side, and similarly the senior people on the Chinese side, to try to see whether there is a way in approaching those issues seriously. And there doesn't seem to be any meeting of minds so far. So I would say that there's still work to be done. We need to continue because we have so many other meetings coming up where there would be either virtual dialogues or there would be face-to-face meetings. And therefore, we have to see that, yes, India has to play a role in Asia, in the global south, and in the BRICS in the forthcoming meetings. And therefore, we need to work together with the Chinese, with the other people in the G20 and in the BRICS.
One final question to you, sir. This is with regards to the expansion of BRICS as is being discussed. Now, the grouping was dismissed earlier on by the West and some had even predicted its swift demise. Now, that grouping has existed despite many inherent contradictions, India and China equation being one among many of the contradictions there. But at the moment, do you see an expansion being unlikely?
Well, the last BRICS summit, there was some decision that their decisions should be taken unanimously. And that has been a continuous position of the BRICS. Now, I think there is slight advance in that position. Now, countries, members of BRICS are saying that, yes, we can think of expansion, but let us bring about some kind of criteria. Whether there is one set of criteria or two sets of criteria, that we can discuss. So these are issues on which one can understand the Chinese and the Russians, they are involved right now in big power struggle. And therefore, they want to have the support of so many more countries of the global south. India and Brazil feel that we have to treat BRICS as a kind of an organization which can bring together the aspirations of the global south so that they continue to work together as well as get the support of the developed countries. So we don't want to see it as a rival to whatever other organization may have been set up by the developed countries. So I think let them work out, because I think India would like to work together with other members of the BRICS. We are not thinking of any confrontation about expansion or non-expansion, because many of these countries which want to join BRICS or BRICS Plus, they are very friendly with India. And our Prime Minister has been to several of these countries and has been highly rewarded there, has been highly appreciated there. So therefore, we cannot be against them. The point is, what should be the format? And there we have to have unanimity in the BRICS negotiations.
So very briefly, also, should India be wary, or should India leverage its position as a consensus builder or a democracy? Because apart from being part of BRICS, it's also part of SCO, which largely now is seen as an anti-West bloc.
Well, SCO membership for India was sought by the Russians, mainly because they were thinking that Chinese were trying to bring Pakistan in, and terrorism had been affecting many of the Central Asian states. So therefore, the emphasis was on how to curb terrorism in Central Asia, in India, and Pakistan was seen as the main center for epicenter of this terrorism. Chinese were insistent that both India and Pakistan should come together, but they were not against the idea of terrorism being considered as an important subject. Now, SCO has become a kind of a political type of an organization, because China is having trouble on Taiwan issue, Russia is having the Ukraine crisis. Therefore, we have to keep in mind that yes, SCO is a useful organization for terrorism, and we have to work together on this, but we should not be too ambitious at this stage, but we should not bind it up. So I think I would say that, well, it should remain, and we should say go slow on the ambitions which many members of the SCO might be having.
All right. Many thanks, sir, for speaking with NDTV on this crucial subject.
Thank you.
Let's move on now and talk about some other big stories that we've been tracking through the week. This is with regards to Israel, which is plunging into a crisis of sorts after the country's parliament passed the first bill of a controversial judicial overhaul. The law has taken away the court's power to veto government decisions. Millions have opposed the change, saying it would erode the independence of the judiciary and harm Israel's democracy. Thousands of Israeli army reservists are now threatening to pull out as a mark of protest, and many of Israel's leaders are worried about a deeper conflict. Israel's Supreme Court says that it will hear appeals against the controversial new law that curbs its power. But for now, the country and the Israeli society remain sharply divided.
Israeli lawmakers have approved Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's contentious plan to restrict the influence of the Supreme Court, defying a wide array of opposition movements that have threatened to shut down large parts of the country with protests. The law removes the power of the Supreme Court to overrule government actions it considers unreasonable. It limits the Supreme Court's ability to challenge parliamentary decisions, to changing the way judges are selected. Every member of the coalition voted in favor, while opposition lawmakers abandoned the Israeli parliament in protest. The Israeli government argues that the measures are necessary to correct an imbalance in power, which has seen the courts increasingly intervene in political decisions in recent decades. It is the first to be approved in a series of bitterly contested reforms aimed at curbing the power of courts.
אני אומר לראשי האופוזיציה, אפשר להמשיך להתווכח, אפשר להמשיך להתנצח, אבל אפשר גם לעשות משהו אחר. אפשר להגיע להסכמות לגבי ההמשך.
ראינו היום מופע חולשה של נתניהו שלא היה כדוגמתו מעולם. אין ראש ממשלה בישראל.
Despite the Israeli parliament's passage of the new bill, the White House says the decades-long partnership between the US and Israel is ironclad.
Our decades-long partnership is ironclad. That continues to be the case. The core of that relationship is certainly on democratic values, is shared democratic values and interests.
Israel's Supreme Court now faces a strange dilemma that could set two of the country's branches of government squarely against each other. The High Court justices have to decide how to handle a plan that would curtail their own power. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV.
Meanwhile, in Europe, the right tilt is getting more politically obvious. Right-wing parties are finding their way into mainstream politics, from Italy and Sweden to Spain. As polls happen in the backdrop of a war in Ukraine since last year and the major energy crisis that has engulfed Europe, or largely had engulfed Europe last year, has the right wing gained? That's the question we are putting across, and we'll give you an example through some of these countries in Europe which have seen a rise in right-wing politics to give you an example or give you a sense of where this politics is headed. For instance, take the example of Sweden, where the Swedish Democrat Party, seen as having neo-Nazi roots, raised the critical and emotive issue of immigration and tied it up with law and order issues to immigrants, and therefore a rise for them in the politics of Sweden. In Italy, Fratelli d'Italia became the first far-right party to secure the highest vote share in any party that had received in recent elections. And a steady performance, if we come to France again now, the steady performance of Marine Le Pen's National Party in France depicts a similar situation. She'd been raising issues such as unemployment, protection of welfare state, and raising minimum wage as well. All the issues that were in fact somewhat in sync with the people. Meanwhile, in Spain, only this week, the prospect of a far-right party aiming to come to power was thwarted. Spain's ultra-nationalist Vox party lost support among voters in Sunday's election, so now it won't be a kingmaker as was earlier predicted. But they did come very close to being part of the governing coalition. Hungary's right-wing party, Fidesz, saw a major win in April last year, grabbing over 50% votes in the legislative elections. Well, this rise of the right in Europe has seen many of these parties being part of governance as well. So you are seeing a kind of change, at least in Europe, that is politically very important at the moment to understand and significant in terms of the changes that one is seeing. Let's now talk about some big social media players as well, and Elon Musk being one of them. His latest move with Twitter's rebranding may have encountered some obstacles. The plan to transform Twitter into X.com has hit a roadblock in parts of Asia, where Indonesia has blocked access to the new web domain, citing anti-porn laws. What is the rebranding aimed at? Parmeshwar Bava explains.
The internet is abuzz as the app formerly known as Twitter announced a name change over the weekend. X.com now redirects to Twitter.com, although the social media platform still invites users to tweet. Musk has long touted his idea of X as an everything app that offers audio, video, messaging, and support for digital payments. He has been vocal about his goal of turning Twitter into a so-called super app, something similar to China's WeChat, since there's no American equivalent to such an app. Twitter was acquired by X Corp both to ensure freedom of speech and as an accelerant for X, the everything app, the company's owner, Elon Musk, has said. But this drastic rebranding doesn't come as much of a surprise to Musk watchers. He has also founded a company called X.com before it merged with PayPal in the year 2000. While that name never resurfaced, that didn't stop Musk from incorporating the letter X to other endeavors, including his space exploration venture SpaceX, his recently launched artificial intelligence app, and the Model X, one of the electric car company Tesla's earliest models. But what does this mean for Twitter? Well, for now, the platform's rebrand is just a name change. No new features have been introduced, staying true to Musk's apparent preferred product strategy of hype first, delivery much later. Meanwhile, other tech companies that rebranded, some controversially and others with success, include Amazon, eBay, Facebook, Google, Instagram, Netflix, Pepsi, Playboy, Starbucks, Tinder, and now X. But Musk's decision to rebrand Twitter as X could be complicated legally because companies including Meta and Microsoft already have intellectual property rights to the same letter. Expanding Musk's platform's reach to include things like shopping and paid subscription content could help it flourish in the long term by creating several revenue streams and making it less reliant on large companies' willingness to spend money. But it's far from clear if a company that's slashed about 3/4 of its staff and is now embroiled in multiple lawsuits over unpaid bills can deliver that. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV.
That's it then this week on India Global. See you again next week. Bye-bye.